To the designer who made all this beauty. My sister raised her glass and said it to 100 people. She meant herself. She was smiling when she said it. For 3 weeks, I had built that wedding with my own hands. The arch of white roses behind the altar. The garland down every pew. The cake, 5 tiers, hand-piped, sugar peonies I'd shaped past midnight while my fingers cramped. Camille hadn't touched a single stem. She had posed beside my work for the photographer and called it her vision. Now she stood in front of the whole reception and took it. My aunt's voice cut over the clapping. "Camille has such a gift." My mother dabbed her eyes like she was proud. I didn't stand. I didn't argue. I set my glass down and reached for the leather sketchbook on the chair beside me. 6 weeks later, Camille would be begging me to take a contract she'd already signed her name to. But that afternoon, with everyone applauding, she still thought she'd won. I'm Eveline, 33, and I'm the one who designs the things my family pretends came from somewhere else. The quiet one, the help. Let me take you back to the morning this wedding began, because the sketchbook in my lap had a first page, and that page had a date. It started with a phone call in May. My cousin Hannah was getting married in June, and the family had a budget problem. Aunt Patricia, Hannah's mother, ran our family the way some women run a charity gala, with a guest list of who mattered and who didn't. She called me because I was cheap. She didn't say it that way. She said, "Eveline, you're so handy with the pretty things, and we'd love to keep it in the family." Handy. That was the word she used for 14 years of work. I run a small design studio out of a converted garage 2 towns over. Weddings, mostly. Florals, cake, the full visual build. I'm not famous, but brides find me, and they come back, and they send their friends. I built it alone after my divorce, 1 event at a time, while my family told everyone I did crafts. I should have said no. I knew the shape of this. But Hannah hugged me when she asked, and Hannah was the only one in that family who had ever looked me in the eye. So I said yes. For her. Patricia's first email had a subject line that should have warned me. Camille will coordinate. Camille is my older sister, 36, polished, the kind of beautiful that arrives in a room before she does. She has never built anything in her life. She manages a boutique and posts photographs of other people's flowers with captions about her eye. My mother has called her gifted since before I could talk. Coordinate, in our family, means Camille stands near the work and takes the meetings. I told myself it didn't matter. I'd do the build. Camille could have the meetings. I just wanted to make something beautiful for Hannah. I drove to Patricia's house that first Saturday with my portfolio and my fabric swatches and my whole heart in a tote bag. Camille was already there. So was my mother. They were sitting at the kitchen island with Patricia, and there was a mood board spread across the marble. My mood board, the one I'd emailed Camille 3 days earlier so she could forward it to Hannah. Patricia looked up. "Oh, good. Eveline's here." Camille was just walking us through her concept. Her concept. I set my tote bag down very gently because the alternative was throwing it. Camille smiled at me. "Eveline, perfect timing. You can help me execute." That was the morning I opened a fresh leather sketchbook in my car before I drove home. On the first page, I wrote the date in 3 words. Hannah's wedding, mine. I didn't know yet what that page would be for. I just knew I needed it to exist. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd already started designing. Hannah had called me herself 2 weeks before Patricia did. Just the 2 of us. She'd sent me photos of her grandmother's garden, the one she grew up in, and she'd cried a little on the phone describing the smell of it in June, peonies and old roses and something green and wet underneath. "I want it to feel like Grandma's still here," she'd said. So I'd already sketched it. 40 pages. The arch, the cake, the garland, the table runs, the exact varietals that would bloom that week. Every page dated. I draw the way some people pray. Slowly, alone, with no audience. Camille had a mood board. I had the whole thing in my hands. Let me tell you what kind of family this is. When I was 9, I made a paper diorama for the school science fair. A coral reef. Every fish cut and painted by me over 2 weeks. It won first place. At dinner, my mother told the story to my father like this. Camille helped Eveline with her project, and it won. Camille was 12. Camille had glued 1 shell. That was the operating system. Whatever I made, the family found a way to spread it thin enough that Camille's name fit on top. I learned to stop bringing things home. By high school, I made things and kept them in my room. By 20, I made things and sold them to strangers because strangers paid in money and money didn't pretend it had helped. My father might have changed it. He used to watch me draw with a kind of quiet attention nobody else gave me. But he died when I was 26. Heart attack, in the garage, surrounded by the half-finished birdhouse he'd been building. After that, there was no one in that house who saw me at all. My mother grieved him by clutching Camille tighter. Camille was what was left of her good years, she said once, not knowing I could hear. I was the reminder of the bad ones. My divorce 2 years after Dad only confirmed it. Eveline can't seem to hold anything together, my mother told her bridge club. She did not mention I'd built a business from nothing in that same year. So when Patricia called me handy, I already knew the script. I just thought, this once, the work would be too obviously mine to give away. I was wrong about that. But I was right to keep dating the pages. Here's the part I haven't told you yet. The wedding was 3 weeks out and Camille hadn't done a thing. I want to come back to that morning at Patricia's kitchen island because something happened there I skipped. After Camille said, "You can help me execute," Patricia handed me a folder. It was a contract, not a family favor. A real contract for the florals and the cake and the full design build drawn up by Patricia, who used to do real estate and never met a thing she couldn't put in writing. The fee was modest but real, $1,200, materials reimbursed separately. And at the bottom, on the line that said designer, a name was already typed. Camille Renner, my sister's married name, not mine. Camille will be the designer of record, Patricia said, the way you'd mention the weather. It's cleaner for the family that way. You'll be compensated, of course. Camille will pass it through. I looked at the contract. I looked at my mother, who was studying her coffee. I looked at Camille, who had the grace to not quite meet my eyes. Pass it through. $1,200 paid to Camille for work I would do under a name that wasn't mine. If you've ever watched your own family decide out loud in front of you that your name doesn't belong on the thing you made, and then ask you to be grateful, you already know what I felt. And if you've felt that, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments the one word your family uses to make your work disappear. Mine was handy. Drop yours below. Then stay with me, because what was typed on that contract is exactly what undid her. I didn't sign anything that morning. I said I'd think about it, and I drove home and I opened the sketchbook to page 1 and looked at the date. Then I did something I want you to understand clearly because it matters later. I did not refuse the contract out of spite. I refused it out of arithmetic. That contract named Camille as the designer of record, which meant, legally and in front of Patricia's whole social world, that Camille was claiming authorship of a body of design work she had not produced. I had the dated sketchbook. I had 40 pages of original drawings, each one made before Camille had ever seen the concept. I had Hannah's voicemails describing the garden. I had every receipt for every flower in my business's name. The contract wasn't a trap they were setting for me. It was a trap they were setting for themselves. Because the one thing my family had never understood about design is that the work has an author whether you credit her or not, and authorship leaves a trail. Not a hidden one, a public one. Drawings have dates. Cakes have a hand. Style is a signature you can't forge by standing next to it. I called Patricia back that night and said I'd do the build. I did not say I'd sign. She heard what she wanted to hear. Camille texted me an hour later. "So glad you're on board. This is going to be my best work yet. My best work, about a wedding she'd designed nothing for." I put the phone face down on the dated first page of the sketchbook and I started to draw the cake. 2 days later, Camille drove to my studio uninvited. I should have known she would. She'd read something in my silence she didn't like. She came in without knocking, the way she'd walked into rooms our whole lives, and she stood in the middle of my workspace looking at the color tests on the wall and the cake sketches pinned to the board. For a second, something crossed her face that I almost mistook for respect. Then it was gone. "We need to talk," she said. "We're talking. Patricia said you didn't sign the contract." She crossed her arms. "Eveline, it's a formality. The family wants it under my name. You know how Patricia is about appearances. Just sign the reimbursement form and let me handle the rest." "I'll do the build," I said. "I never said I'd put your name on it." Her jaw tightened. "It's already done. The boutique's posting it. The blog reached out to me." She took a breath, and when she spoke again, it was the voice she used to use when we were kids and she wanted my lunch money. Soft, wounded. "Do you know how good this is for me?" My manager finally sees me as more than the girl at the register. For once in my life, I have something that's mine. There it was, the closest my sister ever came to honesty. She wanted to be more than the pretty girl at the register. I understood it. I'd wanted to be more than the help my whole life. We wanted the exact same thing. The difference was she'd decided the way to get it was to take mine. "It isn't yours, though," I said quietly. "That's the part you keep skipping. I drew it. I'm building it. You're borrowing my work to feel like more than you are. And I've been letting you do that since we were children, and I'm not doing it for Hannah's wedding." She stared at me. Then the softness vanished and the other Camille arrived, the one who attacks. "You're going to regret this," she said. "Mom's going to hear how you're acting. Patricia, too. And when they do, you'll be the bitter sister who tried to ruin a wedding over flowers." She picked up one of my sugar peonies off the drying rack, turned it in her fingers like she was appraising it, and set it down a little too hard so a petal cracked. "Build it. Sign the form. Take your $1,200 and be grateful. That's the role you're good at." She left. I stood there looking at the cracked petal for a long time. Then I opened the sketchbook and drew the broken peony, exactly as it lay, and I dated the page. Page 18. I was learning that everything in this story would matter later, and I wanted a record of all of it. The escalation that actually broke something open in me happened at the bridal shower. It was the weekend before the wedding, at Patricia's house, 30 women in the backyard. I'd built the centerpieces, small versions of what the wedding flowers would be, a preview. I'd brought them as a gift, set them on every table before anyone arrived, and then I'd planned to sit quietly in the corner the way I always did. Camille stood up to give a little speech about her design journey. She walked the women through the centerpieces table by table, describing her choices, her inspiration, the sleepless nights. A woman asked her how she'd learned to do this. Camille laughed lightly and said, "Honestly, it's just an eye. You either have it or you don't." Then she found me in the corner, and in front of 30 women, she said the thing I think she'd been wanting to say my whole life. "Eveline helps me with some of the labor. She's wonderful with the grunt work, the wiring, the hauling, all the parts I don't have time for. Every artist needs a good pair of hands." She smiled at me, warm as poison. "Thank you, Evie. Honestly, I couldn't lift all those buckets without you. The grunt work. A good pair of hands." In front of 30 women, my sister reduced 14 years of my craft to lifting buckets, and the women smiled at me with the kind, soft pity you give the help, and one of them actually said, "How lovely that you support your sister like that." I felt the old thing rise, the urge to stand up and list everything, to make them understand, and I felt the trap close right behind it. If I did, I'd be the bitter one ruining Camille's shower. So I said, "Of course," and I smiled, and I picked up an empty water pitcher and went to refill it, because that was the role, and in that moment, in front of 30 people, I let myself be it one last time. In the kitchen, alone, I gripped the counter and I made myself a promise. Not out loud. I'd been quiet my whole life. But I promised the 9-year-old with the coral reef that this was the last room I would ever leave by the side door. Then I went back out, smiling, and I refilled every glass, and I memorized exactly how it felt to be erased in a beautiful garden, because I was going to need that feeling, sharp and clear, the following weekend when the garden was mine. My mother called me that night. I almost didn't pick up. I'm glad I did, because it told me everything about why she does what she does. "You upset your sister today?" she said. No hello. "I refilled the water, Mom. That's all I did." "You had a look. People noticed. Camille said you've been difficult about the wedding, that you won't sign the contract." A pause, and then her voice changed into the one thing she had that could still reach me, the wounded, tired voice of a woman who'd buried a husband. "Eveline, do you have any idea how hard these years have been for me?" Your father's gone. Camille is all I have left that's still bright. When she shines, it's the only time I feel like something good came out of my life. Why can't you just let her have this? Why does it always have to be a competition with you?" And there it was, the whole machine laid bare. My mother wasn't cruel for sport. She'd decided somewhere in her grief that Camille was the proof her life hadn't been wasted, and that meant everything good had to belong to Camille, because if it belonged to me, it didn't count. I was the daughter who reminded her of the hard years. Camille was the daughter who let her forget them. So every beautiful thing I made had to be transferred to the daughter who made her feel better, or it threatened the only story that kept my mother standing. I understood it. That was the worst part. I understood her completely, and it didn't make a single thing she'd done to me okay. "It was never a competition, Mom," I said. "I never once asked you to choose me over her. I only ever asked you not to give her the things I made. Those aren't the same. You just can't tell the difference anymore." I let the silence sit. "I'll build Hannah's wedding, but I won't sign my work over to Camille, not this time." "You'll regret being so cold," my mother said. "I've been the warm one my whole life," I said. "It's why I have nothing. I'm going to try cold and see if it leaves me more." I hung up, and I opened the sketchbook to page 1, and I read the date and the 4 words underneath it, and I went to bed. The build took 3 weeks, and Camille appeared for exactly 2 of them, the photographed parts. Let me tell you how a wedding like this actually gets made, because the camera never shows it. It gets made at 4 in the morning when you drive 90 minutes to the wholesale flower market in the city to get peonies before the good ones are gone. It gets made in a cold garage with your hands in ice water so the roses don't open early. It gets made standing for 14 hours piping buttercream until your shoulder locks, then doing it again the next day because the first batch wasn't right. I did all of it, alone mostly. My one helper was a girl named Sadie, 19, who I'd hired part-time the year before. Sadie has a good eye and a bad family of her own, which is maybe why she stayed late without being asked. Camille came twice. The first time, she brought the photographer. Not a wedding photographer, a brand photographer, the kind who shoots influencers. Camille stood in my garage in a white linen jumpsuit, holding a single peony she had not grown, near a bucket of 300 I had, while the photographer told her to look like you're choosing. She chose for 40 minutes. Then she left. The caption that went up that night: 3 weeks of pouring my soul into Hannah's florals. This is what love looks like. Hashtag designed by Camille. Sadie read it over my shoulder and said a word I won't repeat. I didn't comment. I went back to wiring the arch. But I did open the sketchbook, and on a fresh page I drew the arch exactly as it stood in front of me, the real one, half built, my wire and my hands, and I dated it. Page 22. Let me tell you about the market run, because it's the part of design no one photographs and it's the part that cost me the most. The good peonies sell out by 6 in the morning, so I left the studio at 4, drove 90 minutes into the city in the dark, and walked the wholesale market with a flashlight and a list. 300 stems. The vendor who knows me, a man named Walt who's been selling flowers since before I was born, watched me sort through them one at a time, rejecting any that would open too early. "Big job?" he asked. "Family wedding," I said. "Your family know what you do?" He'd met my mother once, years back, when she came with me and spent the whole time on her phone. He remembered. I almost laughed. They know I'm handy. Walt set aside a bucket of the best ones for me, the cream and blush ones I'd built the whole palette around, and he didn't charge me for the extra dozen. "For when one breaks," he said. "Something always breaks." He didn't know how right he was. He didn't know one already had, in my sister's fingers 2 days before. I drove home with the back of the van full of flowers and the sun coming up over the highway, and I did the math in my head the way I always do. 300 stems, $1,400 in materials, $1,200 in fee. I was losing money on this wedding. I'd known that from the start. I was doing it anyway for a girl who'd cried about her grandmother's garden, and the losing didn't bother me. What bothered me was that somewhere in the city, my sister was posting a reel of herself designing while I drove flowers through the dawn with my back aching. I got home, put the peonies in the cooler, and slept 3 hours. Then I got up and started the cake. The cake took 2 full nights. I want to tell you about the second one because it's the night the whole story crystallized for me. It was 2 in the morning. Sadie had gone home. I was alone in the studio piping the sugar peonies, one petal at a time, the way my father used to sand a piece of wood. Slow, no audience. The work its own reward. My shoulder had locked hours ago, my hands cramped around the piping bag. And somewhere around the 40th flower, I started to cry, which I almost never do. Not because of Camille, because of the birdhouse. When my father died, he left a half-finished birdhouse on his workbench in the garage. Nobody touched it for a year. My mother couldn't look at it. Camille didn't notice it. So one weekend I drove over, and I finished it, sanded the joints, fitted the roof, set it on the post in the backyard where he'd meant it to go. I didn't tell anyone. A month later, my mother mentioned to a neighbor that a handyman finished Daddy's birdhouse. A handyman. I'd done it with his tools, by his bench, missing him with every cut, and she'd handed even that to a stranger rather than to me. At 2 in the morning over Hannah's cake, I understood that I had spent my entire life finishing my father's birdhouse, making beautiful things, quietly for the people I loved, and watching the credit go to anyone but me. The peony in my hand was the birdhouse. The wedding was the birdhouse. It had always been the birdhouse. I wiped my face on my sleeve and I kept piping, but something had set in that second night that didn't loosen again. I wasn't going to finish one more beautiful thing and let it become a handyman's work. Not this one. This one had a date on page 1. By dawn, the last sugar peony was drying on the rack, and my hands were steadier than they'd been in years. The second time Camille came, it was for the cake. I had the 5 tiers stacked and crumb-coated in my studio fridge, peonies drying on the rack. Camille arrived with my mother. My mother walked the length of my work table, looking at the sugar flowers, the piping bags, the color tests taped to the wall, and she said, "I want to get this exactly right." She said, "Camille, sweetheart, this is the most beautiful thing you've ever done." Camille said thank you. She said thank you. I was standing right there in my own studio, wearing my own apron, with buttercream under my nails. And my mother looked at 3 weeks of my hands and gave them to my sister, and my sister took them, and neither of them so much as glanced at me. I want to tell you I said something. I didn't. I have been in that exact room 1,000 times in my life, starting with a coral reef when I was 9, and I have learned that the moment you argue, you become the bitter one, the jealous sister, the woman who can't be happy for her family. The argument is the trap, so I didn't argue. I picked up my phone and I called Hannah. I told her the cake was ready, and I asked her one question I'd been holding for 3 weeks. "Sweetheart, do you want a moment in the reception to thank the people who built your wedding? Some couples like to." Hannah said yes. Hannah said, "I was going to ask you the same thing. I want everyone to know who really did this." I told her I'd handle the timing. I told her to trust me. Then I hung up and I opened the sketchbook to a clean page and I wrote, under that day's date, 4 words I'd never written before. Page 1, out loud. That week, Sadie found something I hadn't gone looking for. She was scrolling the boutiques account on her phone in the studio while we wired greenery, and she stopped and turned the screen to me. "Eveline, you need to see this." Camille hadn't just posted one peony photo. Over 3 weeks, she'd built an entire fake process. A reel of her sketching, a stock pad and pen, no actual drawings visible. A photo of her hands near my florals captioned, "12-hour days but worth it." A whole story arc of a designer pouring her soul out, performed by a woman who had cracked one of my sugar flowers and called my work the role I was good at. "That's not even," Sadie started. "I know," I said. "You should report it, or comment, or something. People think she made all this." Sadie's voice cracked with a 19-year-old's outrage. "It's not fair." She was right that it wasn't fair. But I'd learned something in 14 years of this family that Sadie hadn't learned yet. You don't win against a person like Camille by arguing in the comments. You win by being so obviously, undeniably the author that no caption can survive standing next to the real thing. Arguing makes it a he said, she said. The work makes it a fact. There was something worse on the screen, though, and Sadie scrolled to it before I could look away. Camille had pinned a post to the top of the boutique's page. A designer inquiry form. She was using her Hannah Florals as the centerpiece of a pitch for new clients, soliciting paid bookings, society weddings, on the strength of my work. One comment underneath, from a woman with a verified account and a planning company in the city, said, "Stunning. DMing you about my October wedding." She wasn't just taking credit for one event, she was building a business on it. My business, with her name on the door. That was the moment the whole thing stopped being about a wedding and started being about every wedding after it. If Camille got away with this, she wouldn't stop. She'd book the October bride and the one after, and she'd come to me each time with the same soft voice, "You're so good with the labor," and I'd spend the rest of my life as the invisible hands behind my sister's name. I'd watched my mother do this to me with a coral reef. I was watching my sister scale it into a career. "I'm not going to comment," I told Sadie. "I'm going to let her build the lie as tall as she wants. The taller it is, the further it falls when someone sets the truth down next to it." Sadie looked at me like she was deciding whether that was wisdom or surrender. "And who sets it down?" I didn't answer. I just turned to a fresh page and started sketching the way the cake would sit on the veranda at the reception, in the good afternoon light where everyone could see it. Sadie, it turned out, had her own stake in this, and I didn't know yet how much. She'd come from a family that gave her sister everything and her nothing. She'd told me that much, once, late, when we were both too tired to keep secrets. She watched Camille take credit for my hands, and somewhere in there, she stopped seeing my sister and started seeing her own. That's why she stayed late. That's why, 3 weeks later, she'd be one of the 4 guests who told a journalist exactly who built the arch. But that came later. First, Camille made a mistake she didn't know was a mistake. The week before the wedding, the lie got too big to hold. She got nervous. Hannah's mother, Patricia, was telling everyone in the family that Camille had really outdone herself, and the boutique where Camille worked had started reposting #DesignedByCamille. A bridal blog with a real following had reached out. They wanted to feature the wedding. They wanted specifically the designer's portfolio and process shots. Camille had no portfolio. Camille had no process shots. Camille had a white linen jumpsuit and one photo holding a peony. So Camille called me, sweet as anything. "Eveline, the blog wants some behind-the-scenes pictures. Do you have any of, the building process? Just send them to me and I'll forward them." I asked her whose name the feature would run under. A pause. "Well, the design's under my name on the contract, so it just makes sense. But you'll totally be, credited as part of the team." Part of the team, for my own 40-page concept. Here's where I want you to predict something with me, because the next move is the whole story. Camille needs proof of a process she didn't do. The only proof in the world is in my hands. Dated, drawn, mine. So before you hear what I sent her, drop a comment with your guess. Do I send her my real work, or do I send her nothing? The answer is neither, and the reason why is the cleanest revenge I've ever taken. Keep watching. I told Camille I'd put something together for the blog. Then I emailed the blog's editor myself, politely, professionally, from my business account. And I asked one question. "Before the feature runs, can you confirm whose design work it credits?" I ask because I'm the designer, and I'm happy to provide my full dated portfolio for verification. I attached 3 things. Page 1 of the sketchbook, with its date. Page 22, the arch. And a photo of the cake in progress in my studio, my hands in frame, my business sign on the wall behind it. I did not mention Camille. I didn't have to. I just gave the editor the trail. The editor wrote back in 2 hours. "Thank you for clarifying. It will hold the feature until the wedding so we can confirm details in person. Looking forward to meeting the designer." In person, at the wedding. I forwarded Camille a single, generic, low-resolution photo of some buckets of flowers, with a note. "Here's a process shot for the blog. White heart." She thanked me. She sent it on. She thought she'd won that round too. She'd just invited a journalist to the one event where my hands would be everywhere and her name would be on nothing. I thought I had it. I want to be honest about how wrong that felt 3 days before the wedding. Because Camille is not stupid. She's many things, but she's not stupid. And when she senses the ground shifting, she moves fast. 2 days before the wedding, Patricia called me. Not warm this time. Cold and businesslike, the real estate voice. "Eveline, there's a problem with the reimbursement." She paused. "The family's decided it's cleaner if all the wedding vendors invoice through Camille, since she's the coordinator of record. So I'll need you to bill her, not us, and I'll need it itemized under her business name." Another pause. "Also, I spoke with the blog. I told them Camille is the point of contact. If anyone reaches out to you, please redirect them. We don't want mixed messages at Hannah's wedding." I sat down on my studio floor with my back against the cake fridge. This was the counterattack, and it was a good one. If I billed through Camille's business, the paper trail would say I was her subcontractor, that she was the designer, and I was hired help. If the blog's only contact was Camille, my email to the editor would look like a jealous sister trying to insert herself. In one phone call, Patricia had built a frame where the truth I'd been collecting could be made to look like exactly what they'd always called me: bitter, grasping, the help who couldn't accept her place. For about an hour, I believed they'd won. I'd done everything quietly, kept my receipts, dated my pages, and they'd simply changed the paperwork around me, the way they'd changed the story around me my whole life. The work was mine, and they were going to make the record say it wasn't. I called Sadie. I think I needed to say it out loud to someone who'd be angry on my behalf, because I'd run out of being angry on my own. Sadie listened. Then she said the thing that turned it back around. "Eveline, who actually talked to the bride? Who has Hannah's voicemails? Who did Hannah call in May before any contract existed?" "Me." "Hannah called me." 2 weeks before Patricia ever made a contract, before Camille had a mood board, Hannah had cried on the phone to me about peonies and her grandmother's garden. Patricia could rewrite the invoicing. She could name Camille the contact, but she couldn't rewrite the one thing that came before all her paperwork. A bride who knew, in her own voice, on a date, who she'd actually asked. "I'm not billing through Camille," I told Patricia the next morning, calm as still water. "I'll waive the fee entirely. Consider the design my gift to Hannah." I let that land because a gift can't be a subcontract. And the blog can talk to whoever they like. I only sent them my dated portfolio. If that confuses the story, it's not me who should be worried. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "You're making a mistake," she said finally. "Maybe," I said. "But it'll be my mistake under my name. That'll be new." I hung up. My hands were shaking. I'd just given away $1,200 and kept the one thing they couldn't invoice away from me. The truth that the work was a gift, freely given by its author, to the only person who'd asked her directly. The setback had a second floor, though, and it came that same night. Hannah called me crying. Not the good kind. "Eveline, my mom just told me you're refusing to work with Camille, that you're trying to make a scene, that you'll ruin the wedding." Her voice was breaking. "She said if you cause a problem tomorrow, it'll be in front of everyone, and it'll be my wedding that gets remembered for it. Please. I can't have a fight tomorrow. I just want my day." And there it was, the lowest point, the one that nearly stopped me cold. Because Patricia had found the only lever that could move me, not my pride. Hannah's wedding. If I set that book down, I might be handing the bride a memory of a family blowing up around her. I could win and still ruin the one person who'd ever been kind to me. I almost called it off. I sat in the dark of my studio with the sketchbook open to page 11, Hannah's grandmother's garden, the note in the margin, and I came as close as I have ever come to letting them win for good. Then I did the only thing that could undo Patricia's lie. I told Hannah the truth and let her choose. "Hi, Hannah," I said. "I'm not going to make a scene. I'm not going to fight anyone, but I am going to let the truth be in the room, quietly, if it asks to be. Your mom told you I'm trying to ruin your wedding. I designed your whole wedding. I drew your grandmother's garden from the photos you sent me. I did it because you asked me in May, before any of this. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked you on the phone. Do you want the people who built your wedding to be thanked truthfully tomorrow? You decide. Whatever you say, I'll honor it." A long silence. Then Hannah, steadier now. "Send me the page, the garden one." I photographed page 11 and sent it. A minute later, she wrote back, "That's my grandmother's garden. You drew it before anyone signed anything. Yes, I want the truth in the room. And, Eveline, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it had gotten like this." I closed the phone and I breathed for what felt like the first time in 2 days. They'd built a frame to make my truth look like jealousy, but they'd forgotten that the truth had a witness who outranked all of them, the bride. And the bride had just chosen it. The wedding was at the Whitmore estate, an hour out of town, a restored 1890s house with gardens that ran down to a pond. Hannah picked it because it looked like her grandmother's place. I'd designed every floral element to extend the existing garden, so you couldn't tell where the house ended and my work began. That was the point. The best design disappears into the thing it serves. I arrived at 5 in the morning with Sadie and a refrigerated van. We built for 9 hours. The arch went up against the tree line, white roses and trailing greenery, exactly as page 22. The garland ran the length of the stone aisle. We placed the cake last in the shade of the veranda, 5 tiers, the sugar peonies catching the light like the real ones 20 feet away. Sadie stepped back and looked at it and got quiet, and then she said, "Eveline, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen anyone make." Anyone make. The pronoun mattered to me more than she knew. Camille arrived at noon, in a guest's dress. She walked the gardens like a host, accepting compliments. Thank you. It just came together." A great-aunt grabbed her hands. "Camille, it's like a fairy tale." Camille pressed her palm to her chest, moved by her own talent. My mother arrived an hour later and went straight to Camille's side, and the two of them stood under my arch receiving congratulations for it, while I knelt in the grass 40 feet away fixing a garland clip with a pair of pliers in my work clothes invisible. The cake almost didn't make it. I'll tell you because it's the kind of thing that decides a wedding and never gets seen. The top tier shifted in the van on the gravel drive. When I opened the back doors, the whole stack had leaned a ½ inch, enough to crack the fondant seam on the 3rd tier and tilt the sugar peonies I'd spent 2 nights shaping. Sadie made a sound like she'd been hit. I had 90 minutes before guests arrived and 1 box of spare flowers, Walt's dozen, the ones he'd set aside for when one breaks. I didn't panic. I've learned that panic is a luxury you take after the work is done. I rebuilt the seam with a warm spatula, reset the tier, and replaced the cracked peonies one at a time with the spares, my hands steady because they had to be. Sadie held the light. When it was done, you couldn't tell. You can never tell. That's the job. The beauty arrives looking like it cost nothing, and the cost is invisible, and that invisibility is exactly the thing my family had spent 14 years mistaking for proof that I hadn't done anything at all. Walt's dozen saved the cake. Something always breaks. He'd known. I set the last spare peony in place as the first car pulled up the drive. Then I stepped back, the way Sadie had, and I let myself see it whole for 1 second before the day swallowed it. A woman I didn't recognize moved through the garden taking notes on a small pad, mid-40s, sharp eyes, a camera around her neck that was not for taking pictures of canapes. The blog editor, she'd come. She stopped near the cake for a long time. Then she found a server and asked a question, and the server pointed, not at Camille. The server pointed at me, kneeling in the grass with my pliers. The editor started walking over, and across the garden, my sister, who missed nothing about an audience, saw a stranger with a press camera walking toward me instead of her, and for the first time in 3 weeks, Camille's smile slipped. The ceremony was perfect. I'll give it that. Hannah came down the stone aisle under the arch I'd built, and she was crying, and her grandmother's garden bloomed all around her exactly the way she'd described it on the phone in May, and for 10 minutes, none of the rest of it mattered to me. I stood at the back, behind the last row, and I watched a girl get married inside something I made, and I let myself feel it. Then the reception started and the family closed ranks the way it always does. Let me back up to the cocktail hour, because the editor and I had a conversation in the garden that decided how the whole evening would go, and I made a choice in it that I want you to understand. Marguerite Vance found me by the arch while I was tucking a loose stem back into the greenery. She didn't introduce herself as press right away. She just stood beside me and looked at the arch for a while. "You built this," she said, not a question. I did. "The whole installation? The florals, the cake, the garland, the table runs? I drew it in May." I kept my hands moving on the stem because it was easier than looking at her. "There's a contract that says someone else designed it. I never signed it." She was quiet a moment. Then, "I'm the editor doing the feature. I was told to interview the designer. A woman in a guest's dress has been telling me about her process for 20 minutes, and none of it matches how this is actually built. So I went and asked the staff." She paused. "They sent me to the woman in the apron." This was the moment I could have made it ugly. I could have pulled out the sketchbook right there in the garden, away from everyone, and handed her the whole case in private. She'd have run the feature under my name, and Camille would never have been publicly caught. Clean, safe, the version where I win and no one sees. I didn't want that version, not because I wanted Camille humiliated for its own sake, but because the wound my family gave me was never private. They erased me in rooms full of people over and over, starting with a coral reef at a dinner table. A private correction heals a private wound. Mine had an audience every single time. So the healing needed one too. "Don't run anything yet," I told Marguerite. "If you want the truth, it'll be in the room after the toasts. Watch the cake. I'll show you then." I looked at her for the first time. I've spent my whole life being corrected in private and erased in public. Just this once, I'd like the truth to go the same way the lie did, out loud. She studied me. Then she nodded, slow, like she'd met women like me before and was glad, for once, to be on the right side of one. "After the toasts," she said. "I'll have my camera ready." Then she went to find a glass of wine and a good vantage point, and I went back to work because the cake still needed its final flowers placed, and I trusted my own timing. I want to be honest about the lowest moment because it came right before the highest one and it nearly broke my nerve. During the cocktail hour, Patricia found me by the cake. She had a glass of champagne and the particular warmth she used when she wanted something. "Eveline, the flowers turned out lovely. Camille worked so hard." She paused. "I heard a journalist's been bothering the staff. If she finds you, just send her to Camille, would you? Camille's the face of this. It'll confuse people if there are two stories." Two stories, as if the truth were a competing version. "Patricia," I said, calm as I could, "the design is mine." Her warmth went cold so fast I felt the temperature drop. "Eveline, don't do this today, not at Hannah's wedding. Do you want to be the woman who made a scene at her own cousin's wedding because she couldn't share credit with her sister?" She let that sit. "Everyone already knows how you get. Don't prove them right." And there it was. The trap I'd avoided my whole life, set one more time, beautifully. If I spoke, I was the jealous sister ruining a wedding. If I stayed quiet, I disappeared. 40 pages, 3 weeks, 14 years, and they'd built me a room with 2 doors, and both of them led to silence. I almost folded. I'm telling you the truth. I stood there with my hands smelling like roses, and I almost decided it wasn't worth it, that I'd let her have it one more time, that being right wasn't worth being called bitter in front of 100 people. Then Hannah walked past on her way to the head table in her grandmother's garden, and she caught my eye and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." And I remembered I wasn't doing this for credit. I was doing it because a girl had cried on the phone about peonies, and I had made her grief into something beautiful, and my family wanted to staple someone else's name to her grief and sell it to a blog. I picked up the sketchbook from the chair where I'd set it, and I waited for the toasts. If you've made it this far, you already know the cake is real and the credit is fake, and you're waiting for the same moment I was. Before it lands, do one thing for me. Tell me in the comments, have you ever stayed quiet to keep the peace and hated yourself for it? Because I'm about to stop. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what page 1 says. Here's how it happened. The best man toasted, the maid of honor toasted. Hannah's father cried into the microphone about his daughter. Then Patricia took the microphone, and I felt it coming before she said a word. "Before we cut this gorgeous cake," Patricia said, "I have to thank the person who made today so magical." She turned and her arm extended, and I knew the shape of her hand before it finished moving. "My niece Camille, who designed all of this beauty. The flowers, the cake, all of it. Camille, sweetheart, stand up. Camille stood. Of course she stood. She rose with her champagne glass and she gave the room a little wave, the practiced modesty of a woman accepting what she'd decided was hers. And she said the line, the one I opened with, the one I'll hear for the rest of my life. To the designer who made all this beauty. To herself. She toasted herself with my hands. And the room applauded, 100 people, my mother loudest among them, dabbing her eyes, clapping for the most beautiful thing her daughter had ever done. I didn't stand right away. I let them clap. I let it crest and start to fade, the way you let a wave go out before you walk into the water. Then I stood up with the sketchbook in my hands and I walked to the cake. I didn't take the microphone. I want you to understand that. I never said a word into that microphone. What I did was quieter than that, and it was worse. I set the leather sketchbook down on the cake table beside the 5 tiers where the light was good and everyone could see, and I opened it to page 1. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, the way the garden had gone gold at sunset, one table at a time, heads turning, the people closest seeing first. Page 1, the date, 3 weeks before Patricia's contract, 2 weeks before Camille had ever seen a mood board. And under the date, in my handwriting, the first rough sketch of the arch that stood 20 feet behind the bride. The exact arch. White roses trailing greenery, the slight asymmetry I'd argued myself into at 2 a.m. I turned the page. The cake, 5 tiers, the sugar peonies, drawn before they existed. I turned it again, the garland, again. Hannah's grandmother's garden, the varietals labeled in my hand, June bloom times noted in the margin. I didn't say a word. I just turned the pages one at a time and let the room read my hands. Marguerite Vance, the editor, was on her feet near the front, her camera up, photographing the open book. She'd seen page 1 already in the garden. She'd come for exactly this. Hannah stood up at the head table. In her grandmother's garden, in my arch, holding my flowers, she stood up and she said, not into the microphone, just out loud in the silence, Eveline made my wedding. Eveline made all of it. I have the voicemails. I called her in May. A beat. Then the great aunt who'd grabbed Camille's hands said slowly to no one. But Camille said, Camille held a flower for a photograph, Hannah said, not cruel. Just done. Eveline built the rest. The wave was moving now table to table, and I just kept turning pages. It didn't move all at once. It moved person by person, the way the truth always does in a room full of people who'd rather not have heard it. Walt's daughter was there. I hadn't known until that moment. She worked for the catering company the Whitmore estate used, and she'd recognized me that morning unloading the van. She stood up at a back table. I saw her this morning. She was here at 5 with a refrigerated truck. She built the arch with the young one. She pointed at Sadie, who had come to help set up and stayed for the ceremony. I watched them for 2 hours before anyone else even arrived. Sadie stood too. She was 19 and her voice shook, but she said it. I've worked for Eveline for a year. She drew all of this in May. I watched her shape every one of those sugar flowers at midnight. Camille came twice, both times for photos. 2 witnesses, then 3, then the server who'd pointed the editor toward the woman in the apron, who now said quietly, She's been working since dawn. The other lady arrived at noon, in a dress. Each one added a fact. None of them was the document. That was the thing my family had never understood. They thought authorship lived in a contract, a name typed on a line. It doesn't. It lives in the dawn run and the midnight piping and the dozen people who saw your hands move. They'd typed a name. I had a room full of witnesses and 40 dated pages, and every wave of it landed harder than the last. The wave kept moving, table to table, and I just kept turning pages. Camille was still standing. Her champagne glass was still raised, frozen at the height of a toast that had nowhere left to go. I watched her try to find the smile and not find it. That's... Eveline, what are you doing? Camille said. Her voice came out thin. This is my... It's dated, Marguerite Vance said. Quietly, but in a silent room, a quiet voice carries. The editor held up the open book toward the table she stood beside. Page 1 is dated 3 weeks before the contract. The whole portfolio is. I asked the staff this afternoon who built the installation. She turned, looking for the server who had gone very still by the bar. He pointed at the woman in the apron. Not at you. Camille's smile finally broke. And here is the thing about my sister that the photographs never showed. When she's cornered, she doesn't cry. She attacks. Huh, this is so typical, Camille said, and her voice climbed, and the room flinched. She always does this. She can't stand it when something is mine. She's jealous. She's been jealous her whole life, ever since we were kids. The coral reef, I said. It was the only thing I said out loud in that whole reception, and I said it gently, and it stopped her like a wall. What? Camille said. When I was 9, I built a coral reef for the science fair. It won. Mom told everyone you helped me. I turned another page, not looking up. You glued one shell. I've spent 24 years letting you glue one shell and call it yours. I'm not jealous, Camille. I'm just done lending you my hands. I closed the book. The silence after that was the loudest sound in the room. My mother stood up. I'd been waiting for her, and I knew before she opened her mouth that she would not save me because she never had. But she surprised me by aiming lower than I expected. Eveline, my mother said, her voice shaking with what she wanted everyone to think was grief. How could you, at Hannah's wedding? You've embarrassed your sister in front of everyone. You've embarrassed this whole family. For what? For credit? It's just flowers, Eveline. It's just a cake. It's just flowers. It's just a cake. I looked at my mother, and the wound I'd carried since I was 9, the one I'd named to myself 1,000 times in that cold garage, the belief that nothing I made would ever be allowed to be mine. I set it down right there, on the cake table next to the book. It was never just flowers, Mom, I said. It was the diorama and the school play sets, and the centerpieces for Camille's wedding, and Dad's birdhouse I finished after he died so it wouldn't sit there unbuilt. It was my whole life, and every single time you handed it to her and told me to be grateful you let me help. My voice didn't rise. I'd learned that from the worst possible teacher, her. I built something beautiful for Hannah because Hannah asked me, and because I'm good at it, and because it's mine. You can call that embarrassing. Hannah calls it her wedding. Hannah, still standing, said, I do. Patricia tried to take the microphone back. Let's just enjoy the… Patricia, Marguerite Vance said, pleasant and immovable, lowering her camera. The feature will run under Eveline's name. I have the dated portfolio and 4 guests who watched her build the arch this morning. I'd hate to print a correction. She smiled. Cleaner that way. Cleaner that way. Patricia's own words handed back to her across the garden. Camille set her champagne glass down because her hand had started to shake. She looked at the room, at the 100 people who had clapped for her 4 minutes ago and were now looking at her the way you look at someone you've just learned has been lying to your face, and she did the thing my sister has never once failed to do when the audience turns. She made it about how unfair it was to her. I can't believe you'd do this to me, she said, to me, and the tears came now, on cue, the way they always came right when she needed them. After everything, I'm your sister. You signed a contract, I said, as the designer of record, for work you didn't do. There's a blog about to run a feature and a journalist standing right there and 100 witnesses. I didn't do anything to you, Camille. I just stopped covering for you. I picked the book back up. That's not the same thing. It only feels like it because no one's ever made you carry your own name before. Patricia made one last try. She'd run this family by deciding who mattered, and she could not stand to watch the deciding leave her hands. Ha! This is a private family matter, she announced to the room, her real estate voice cranked to full. And we are not going to let it spoil Hannah's day. Everyone, please. It stopped being private, Marguerite Vance said, when your niece solicited paid bookings on the strength of this work. I've already screenshotted the post. She said it without heat, the way you'd note a fact for the record. 3 planners in the city follow that account. If a correction has to run, it runs publicly. Or the truth runs now, quietly, and everyone gets to enjoy the cake. Your choice, Patricia. Your choice. The 2 words Patricia had used on me by the cake an hour earlier, when she'd told me I could be silent or be the bitter sister. The editor handed them back, and I watched Patricia understand, for the first time in her life, what it felt like to be offered two doors that both led somewhere she didn't want to go. She didn't answer. There was no answer that helped her. She sat down, and the mother, my mother, looked around the room and found that the faces she'd spent a lifetime performing for were no longer looking at her the way she needed. She sat down too, not sorry, just outvoted for once by the truth. Camille stood alone in the middle of it. The audience she'd built her whole self around had turned, and she had nothing left to perform for. For 1 second, the only second I'll grant her, I saw something real cross her face. Not guilt, fear. The fear of a woman who has just discovered she has no idea how to make anything, and that everyone now knows it. And then I did the thing that ended it. I walked the sketchbook over to the head table and I set it down in front of Hannah, open to page 11, the page where I'd drawn her grandmother's garden from the photos she'd sent, every flower labeled, a small note in the margin that said, "For Hannah," so it feels like Grandma's still here. "This was always for you," I said. "Happy wedding." Hannah read the margin note, and Hannah, in front of everyone in her grandmother's garden, started to cry, the good kind. And she came around the table and she hugged me, the only person in that family who had ever looked me in the eye, and into my shoulder she said, "I knew. I always knew it was you." The applause that started then was not for Camille. I'd love to tell you my sister apologized. She didn't. People like Camille don't apologize when they're caught. They grieve the version of the day where they got away with it. Let me tell you what actually happened, because the fallout was quieter and more permanent than any scene. The blog feature ran 2 weeks later under my name, with my dated portfolio, 11,000 people sharing it. The headline was about authorship, about the women who build the beauty other people take credit for. Marguerite Vance is good at her job. She didn't name Camille. She didn't have to. Everyone at that wedding already knew, and the internet didn't need to. My phone started ringing. Brides who'd seen the feature, a planner in the city who'd been looking for a designer she could trust, 3 bookings in the first week. By the end of the month, I'd raised my rates, hired Sadie full-time, and turned down more work than I'd taken on in any year of my life. Other things surfaced in the weeks after, the way things do once a lie cracks and people stop protecting it. Walt called me. Walt from the flower market. He'd seen the feature shared by his daughter, the caterer. He told me, almost shy about it, that he'd been telling brides for years that the best designer he sold to was a quiet woman who comes at 4 in the morning and knows exactly what she wants. He'd never had a name to give them before. Now he did. 3 of those bookings came from Walt. Sadie told me something else, late one night while we packed an order. The reason she'd stayed late all those weeks, the reason she'd stood up in that reception with her voice shaking. Her own older sister had spent their childhood taking the credit for Sadie's drawings, the same way Camille took mine. "When your mom said it's just flowers," Sadie said, "I heard my mom. I wasn't standing up for you. I was. But I was standing up for 9-year-old me too." I told her I knew. I'd been standing up for 9-year-old me the whole time. And one more card flipped, the small, cruel kind. Patricia, weeks later, hosted a luncheon and told the family I'd embarrassed everyone. But Hannah's father, Patricia's own husband, had been at that reception. He pulled me aside at a cousin's birthday and said low, so Patricia wouldn't hear, "I watched you turn those pages. I've known for years your mother does that to you. I should have said something a long time ago." He didn't apologize exactly, but he saw me. After 50 years of that family, somebody finally said it out loud. And then came the part that still makes me quiet when I think about it. 6 weeks after the wedding, Camille called me, not to apologize. Camille had landed a client off the back of her Hannah feature before it was corrected. A real client, a real contract, a society wedding, signed under her name, deposit taken, and she could not design a single thing. She had no portfolio, no process, no hands. She had a signature on a contract and a deadline she couldn't meet, exactly the way I'd had a name typed on a contract I never signed. "Eveline," she said, and her voice was small in a way I'd never heard, "I'm in trouble. I signed this thing and I don't know how to. Could you just help me execute? I'll tell you what I almost did, because it would have been the old me. I almost said yes. The reflex to pick up my sister's dropped work and call it love is 14 years deep, and it doesn't die because you win one afternoon. But I'd written 4 words on page 1, out loud. No, I said, not cruelly, just clearly. I'm not lending you my hands anymore, Camille. You signed your name to something you can't make. That's not my problem to fix. It's yours. Maybe it's time you learned to build something. I did. There was a reason her voice was that small, and I learned it later from the planner who eventually came to me instead. The October Bride, the verified account who'd commented, DMing you about my October wedding, had signed with Camille off the boutique post, paid a deposit, and then watched the wedding feature get corrected to my name 2 weeks later. She'd done what any client does. She'd asked Camille for a portfolio, real drawings, process shots, past work, and Camille had nothing because Camille had never made anything, and the one body of work she'd pointed to had just been publicly proven to be mine. So the October Bride was threatening to pull out and take her deposit back, and Camille was staring down a contract she couldn't fulfill and money she'd already half spent. The trap they'd built for me, a name on a contract for work you can't claim, had closed on the only person who actually deserved to be in it. Could you just take the October one? Camille said, getting to the real ask. I'll give you the deposit. I'll tell them you're my associate. Please, Eveline. They'll sue me. Her associate. Even now, drowning, she wanted my name underneath hers. She told me I was heartless. She told me family helps family. She cried. I let her. And then I said the boundary I'd needed my whole life to be able to say. I love you. I'm not jealous of you, and I never was. I was just tired of disappearing. I'm not going to disappear anymore. If you want to be a designer, learn. If you just wanted my name on your contracts, those days are over. The blog ran under mine. So does my work. From now on, so does the credit. And I hung up, gently, and I did not feel the old guilt come. I checked for it the way you check a tooth that used to ache. It was just quiet. My mother and I don't talk much now. She sided with Camille, the way water runs downhill, and she keeps waiting for me to apologize for humiliating the family. I won't, but I'm not at war with her either. I send a card on her birthday. I don't go to the dinners where they tell the coral reef story. I built a smaller family out of the people who saw me, Hannah, Sadie, the brides who come back, and it turns out a small family that sees you is worth more than a large one that doesn't. The October Bride found me anyway. A month after I told Camille no, the planner who'd commented on that post tracked down the actual designer through the corrected feature. She emailed me directly, hired me directly, and signed a contract with my name on the designer line. The first time in my life a contract said what was true. I framed nothing. I just looked at it for a while, the typed name matching the hands. Camille's deposit problem resolved itself the way these things do. The October Bride pulled out, took her money back, and the boutique quietly stopped reposting her florals. Camille still manages the register. My mother tells the family she's taking a break from design to focus on herself. I let them keep that story. It costs me nothing now. Hannah and I are close now. She has a baby coming in the spring, and she's already asked me to design the nursery, and she introduces me to people as my cousin Eveline, the artist. The artist, not Handy, not the help. I had to be 33 before someone in my family said that word about me and meant it. The sketchbook sits on a shelf in my studio now, the same leather one, the dated pages a little soft at the corners. Sometimes a new client asks about it, and I open it to page 1, and I show them the date, and I tell them the rule I learned at my cousin's summer wedding, the one I'd give to anyone who spent their life building beautiful things that someone else's name got stapled to. The work has an author whether they credit you or not. So date your pages, sign your hands, and the day they raise a glass to the designer who made all this beauty, stand up and let the room read who you are. I'm Eveline, I made it, and I'm not lending out my hands ever again. That's my story. 3 weeks, 40 pages, one toast that finally went the right way. If you've ever watched someone take credit for the thing you built with your own 2 hands, this was for you. If it reminded you to put your name on your work before someone else does, take that as your sign. Do it this week. And if you know someone who's spent their whole life being called the help in their own family, Share this with them. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.